Can you guys see this? Give me a thumbs up if you guys can.
Okay, Kevin, just give me 1 second to get the YouTube screen.
Yeah. In the meantime, if any of you guys want to unmute or say in the chat, what do you think CSS means and what does it do?
Okay, the YouTube is not working because I have to get verification. It's fine. You can get started.
All right, cool. Anrushi says cascading style sheet. That's a great definition. Does anybody else? Rita, nice work. You guys can also feel free to unmute and say it as well. We want this to be a voice as well, so you guys can interact better. And it's totally fine if you don't know what it is. Just give a quick guess. All right, so we're gonna move on. Yeah, so Anrushi and Farida, you guys are completely correct. CSS is the cascading style sheets. And it's sort of how you're able to get HTML elements to be displayed. And you use sort of like a .css file type to actually show CSS. And it's really amazing that you can create very cool designs and also show how a lot of these things could be styled correctly. It's sort of called these sort of art HTML. And you're able to create some really, really cool looking applications. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna do some starter code, and what we want you guys to do is basically go onto the starter code and fork this repository over here. So you just press the fork button, you'll be able to have a clean slate and work on it. I'm not sure if you guys used REPL before, so I'll just go ahead and walk you guys through the process. This will help you sort of workshop what we're going to be doing and follow along as we build our CSS thing. And if you're going to see here, we're going to be creating sort of like a cookie jar. And it's going to change from this somewhat ugly HTML code right here to some really, really cool, really cool looking cookie jar thing for our CSS aspect. So let's just go ahead and click on this right here. So once you click on this, you should be able to sort of see something like this. You can sort of fork the repository. And once you press this fork button, I will also put this in the chat, by the way, so you can access it here. So when you click on the fork button, you're able to start with a clean slate with the code. And we will be editing some of this code soon. So if you guys are done, just go ahead and say done in the chat. we'll give you guys a few to do this. Let me know if there's any questions about this process. All right, so I think we will move on. Thank you to all of you guys in the chat. If you guys have any questions, feel free to also private message me as well. And if you're not done, just let me know. So if we go back to here, right here, you'll be able to see that we're going to be creating this cookie jar. And so we'll just start that process now. And so if you go and see in here, you'll see the HTML thing. And I think Aryan might have taught you about a lot of these elements in the past. So if you have not looked at this, basically it's just a bunch of tags that will determine sort of what types of text, what types of how elements are grouped on the specific website. We won't be going into detail on a lot of these HTML elements, but we will be adding some sort of attributes and some sort of groupings and div that we'll be adding to make things look better. So if you just want to click the run button right here in the top, you can just see that it will show up to be a cookie jar and have this really nice looking cookie GIF, and as well as sort of some text and a small button here. But if you look at this right now, right, you think that's pretty ugly, right? So how do we make it so that it looks nice and styled? One thing that we need to do is we need to add a sort of style sheet. And how we do that is we actually use the link tag, right? So this link tag will tell the code to look for a certain style, a CSS file to determine the style. So right now it's looking for href equals style.css. So somewhere in our project here, we have a style.css file that's able to access and see, have all the code that will determine the style for this specific HTML sheet. So what we need to do is go ahead and, if you see right here, click the top button, add file. So what we can do is we're going to add a new file called style.css in order to link this HTML file right here based off this style.css to this style sheet. So then whenever we have style in this sheet, it will show up in this HTML right here. So if you want to know the information again, add file right here. You just click on add file and add the file name style.css. Let me know if you're not done or you have any questions along the way. Now, the first thing I want to do is I want to add a sort of background to this. So I just don't want it to be a complete white background. Now, what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to teach you about a new attribute in HTML. That attribute is called class. Now, what this does is it has the opportunity for me to link a certain class, inside of the style.css to your HTML. And we'll talk about classes later. But Lena, what your question is a link tag already added when we open a new REPL, or do we add it? It should be already added. All you have to do is add that style.css. If it's not added already, just go ahead and add this line of code right here. Zondev, that's correct. So your CSS styles will, it's not really automatically added. What we're going to do is we're going to link certain classes, and those class definitions of those classes will be inside the style.css. So well, you'll see right here now that we're going to be adding a specific class, and that name will be called gradient, because we're going to want to define a gradient inside of this class. So then now we know that to tell the HTML, look for in style.css a certain gradient class. So and then append those styles to the body. So add those styles to the body if the class is gradient. So now that we added this class attribute, what we can do is go into the style.css and create a class. And how we create the class definition is doing something like this. You first start with the dot, the name of the class, and then have brackets around afterwards. And inside, we're going to define certain attributes of the style. So what this is going to link straight with your HTML class right here. So once you're able to link those things, now we can start to define certain styles in here to show up on our body tag. So all you have to do right here is we're going to add a new attribute in here called background. What this is going to do is going to define a background for the entire screen right here. And in this case, what we want to do is create a linear gradient. And this code is a little bit complicated, but you can find a lot of this if you search online how to do a gradient in CSS. It's just linear gradients. The first one determines the direction. We want it to go from the colors to go from left to right. So what we're going to do is to right, and then add these two elements right here, two colors. So 9796F0, FP774. You'll see that these are two really nice looking colors. You'll see a linear gradient from left to right. So you just run this right here. You should see that it has a gradient that goes from sort of like a blue to a pink. So just go ahead and add this element real quick, and this should provide a linear gradient for your background. Yes, I can put the number colors in the chat. So go ahead and let me know if you are not done with this. How do you link the gradient class again? Great question. So there's a gradient right here, and then all we have to do is add a class attribute to the body. So class equal gradient. And that will link this class to this thing right here. All right. So what we want to do is I want to sort of create a sort of rounded box around this. So sort of like, and this text looks kind of black, doesn't look kind of nice to me inside of this sort of gradient. But what we can do is we can create sort of like a white background that will really help to accent those black text. So what we can do is we can go ahead and create a new sort of class in this div right here. And this div is a container for all of our other code. It has like the audience cookie jar, the GIF, and everything. So we can create a box around that container of code. And you'll see this, and later on as we add this, it will be able to create a container around this of a certain color, and we'll add a sort of like a white background. So go ahead and add this specific class called rounded box, and this will provide you the opportunity to add more code in style.css to define this class and provide style. So in here, div, add the class attribute rounded box with a dash. So now when you go in here, you're now able to do the rounded box and add the background color white. So this is a new attribute. You can define the color, not just the entire background. You can define the color, and when you run, you can see that inside of this, there's sort of like a white background. Now, can anybody sort of tell me what do you think looks a bit wrong about this background right here? Yes, I'm Maritha. Feel free to unmute as well. True, Shweta. Yes, also great pointer. There's also the margin issue, right? So if you see here, there's going to be a certain cookie jar, and there's a little bit no space between each of them, right? So they're too close, and also there's not a lot of space from the top. We can barely see the gradient, and also the box is sort of has very sharp edges. And sort of again, Miriam, sort of how you create a box is you're going to need to create the HTML element link right here, class equals rounded box, and then you create a background color next to that, underneath that container to create the box. Grima, have we already started? Yes, we have. If you let me just send the link again to follow along. What you're going to do is you need to go to that link, fork the repository, and add these 2 lines of code. Just let me know when you're able to fork that repository, and we'll get you going with the other stuff. All right, so yeah. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to actually start with some margins and paddings. And what those things will do is those things will add a certain amount of space between the background and this container. The parent and what we call sort of the parent element and the inner element, the actual element where you're putting the code on. So margin will determine the space between the parent and the element. So remember that, because there might be a quiz later on, a cool quiz. So margin is going to be something, we'll just set it as sort of like something like 30 pixels. And when we run, you can see that now you're able to see more space between this gradient background and this white container right here. Forking a repository basically means that you're copying the code into something that you're going to work on. Thank you, Sanskrit. And also, what you can also do is add another element called padding. And what padding does in the circumstance, it adds some space between this specific element, the container, and its inner elements. So what you'll see here is if we add a padding of 30 pixels, you're going to see that there is now a sort of space in between the containers. And now it looks a little bit better. There's still one other thing though, right? And that thing is that we're still missing the border radius. We're missing that rounded corner. What do we have to add in HTML before we put rounded box? Yes, good question. So in this div right here, you can see that the class is equal to rounded dash box. And sort of we add this code right here inside of this specific div, and we're able to add that container. What is padding again? Lena, great question. Padding is basically the space between this element, which is a container, and its inner element. So it's the thing that creates that space right here between this white container and the text inside. Escobar, were you able to figure that out? Great, amazing. So now let's add something that will add the rounded corners to this box. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to add the radius, border radius attribute. And let's just set the radius to something like 30%, 30 pixels. And as you can see here, now we're able to add sort of like a rounded corner to this. Right, so now what I want to do is, what if I have some sort of like really long page like this, and I want this entire container to show up in the middle. Middle and center are some of the hardest things to do for CSS. So it's important to really get these principles down. And how we do that is we're going to add something called a flex box. And to add a flex box, we're able to sort of change, be able to see the positioning between different certain things. So if we want to add a flex box here, all we need to do is just add a simple element saying display flex. This is how you add a flex box. And what you're going to be able to do with this flex box, you're going to be able to align certain items and justify content. And what those attributes do is sort of center it vertically, center it horizontally, and center it vertically. Marianne, what does px mean? Those are pixels. So pixels that you see on the screen, they sort of define certain amounts of space, right? So 30 pixels is going to be longer than 20 pixels, and it will define sort of a certain amount of space to show certain things. It's basically a size parameter. So now what we're going to do is we're going to justify content, center, and align items. And what justify content does is it's able to sort of align these things horizontally. Align items will align these things vertically. One more thing we need to do. Hold on real quick. Yeah, so just make sure you guys add these 3 attributes real quick. Let me know if you need any help. Yep, and then we have to add our very last element, which tells us the direction of flex. And what this means is that it will tell us whether or not to render the elements horizontally. So that means all in the same row, or render them column-wise. And since all of our elements are sort of like one after the other, we want to make sure that we're rendering these column-wise. What's the difference between justifying and aligning? Great question. Justifying the content means that you're sort of aligning things horizontally. For align items means you're aligning things vertically. Isn't there already an option in HTML to align? That is correct, but sometimes this is just a great tool for sometimes when text align doesn't work. So you'll see that we will be using some amounts of text align before. Can you copy and paste? Yeah, I'll copy and paste the entire HTML for you guys, just in case we haven't caught up too much. So this is the code that we have so far. We'll be learning a little bit more about text align soon. Also, text align, another thing about text align, just realize, is that text align only gives you the horizontal content align. So yeah, we can see that I'm also not really good at CSS. So you'll see that align items is kind of not really working for me, which is really expected as you move along with sort of a lot of this HTML and CSS code. CSS can be really tricky to do a lot of center lines. So just be careful of that, and ask for help if you guys need anything. So we're just going to continue right here. So now what I want to really do is I want to be able to change the font. I'm not really a big fan of the font here. And how we change that is with a certain attribute called font family. And we'll add that to the rounded box. And what this does, you might be thinking, hey, why would you add this like random font thing to the rounded box, which is sort of kind of like a it's a box, doesn't have any font in it. But what this actually does, it looks at all of its child elements. So this box is a lot of children, which is like this orange cookie jar, this is amazing jar, a lot of these elements. And what is it? It adds that font to every single child element. So now if we sort of add a font family right here, you can see that the text has now changed to that specific font. All right, cool. Now what I want to do is I want to have the ability to sort of align items, justify content inside of this. And what we can do is we can actually add a specific sort of text align. Just like I think what you guys mentioned. And when we add that, that should work to sort of change everything to the center. And sort of all the text is now in the center, the buttons are in the center as well. So yeah, add these two features right here, text align center, font family, all good to go. Let me know if there's anything you guys need. All right, so we're gonna add our third CSS class, and it's going to be sort of like a title. So we want to change this text. I want to make it a little bit, at least a little bit bigger. And I'm going to do that by adding another class attribute inside of this h1 tag. And this class attribute, what we're going to call that is title. And since it is a title of the web page. So then what we can do is we can then go back to here and define that title class. In this case, what we're going to do is we're going to change the font size. And for the font size, we're going to give it a size of 50 pixels. And for the font weight, what this defines is sort of how bold the text is. We're going to change that to 500. And sort of the larger the number is, it goes by increments of 100, the more sort of bold the text is itself. So if you want to go back to the HTML, you add the class attribute equal to title inside of this h1 tag. Now if we run, you can see it now. It's a lot bigger and looks a lot nicer. Anybody need any help or have any questions? Let me know if you're done in the chat. Neha, the font changed with the font family right here. So if I sort of don't use this code right here, you'll see that it has this weird looking font, in my opinion. But if you add the font family in the rounded box right here, you'll be able to see that it changes into this really nice looking font. This example right here, this is sort of changing the actual boldness of the font as well as the size. Miriam, yeah, here's the HTML code right here. Yeah, Mamta, line items wasn't working for me as well. Could be have something to do with sort of Rebel itself, or so it's just really difficult to do sort of vertically aligned. So we'll look at that another day. Shreya, the code is not working. What part of the code is not working for you?
Well, I'm not sure. Like the whole thing is not, like the coloring and like the background is not there.
Yeah, so do you see that your style CSS looks something like this?
Not exactly.
Yeah, so just go ahead and copy this into your style.css. I'll put this in the chat. And if any of you guys haven't been following along, just go ahead and copy this in the chat. So Shreya, if you're able to access that and sort of put that into your style CSS, let me know if that works. Miriam, the title disappeared for you. Sort of once you added this code right here, it disappeared for you.
No, I was saying that I think I messed up something in the HTML code because the font size changed. Like it got a lot bigger. But I can't see Aryan's cookie jar anymore.
Oh, yeah. So did you add this class attribute right here in the h1 tab?
I actually didn't type in a less than sign. I think I should do that now.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, that would be great. It will. Yeah. So I'll give you guys a little bit of time to sort of troubleshoot that. Let me please feel that I'm free to unmute. I want you guys to hear you guys' input as we work through this. Great area.
I was just wondering if there was a way to make the title all capital letters.
Yeah. You can make it all capital. You can just sort of change this sort of text right here inside of the HTML element. This will define sort of your text right here. So if you want to make it all
Oh.
capital,
So
yeah,
there's no
you-
like specific way to like make the class title like the class inside the like the style all caps, I guess. I'm not sure how to explain this.
yeah, I understand. There is a way for you to do that actually. So you're right. And how you would do that, let's just move back to show you how that works. Right. And there's actually a method you can add in here that would be called text transform. And what you can do is transform all the text into a certain thing. So if we want to do text transform right here, uppercase, we should turn all this into uppercase. So there is a CSS element for you to do that. So great question.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. You can also do other things in here as well, such as capitalize. And what that'll do is it will add should run right here, but it will add sort of like a capitalization to the first element, to the first letter. Yes, of course, it is definitely possible, Lena. So basically, you'll have to create like a CSS class for each one of these elements, each one of these. So you're going to add like a paragraph class, and you can set the font size for that specific font. And what you want to make sure you're going to do is only add this font size to this title class, right? Not to the rounded box. So for example, if I were to add this font size to the rounded box, for example, right here, you're going to see that the entire thing just looks way too big. All right. So let's go ahead and move on here. Now, what I want to do is I want to sort of make this button look better, right? You're not going to see a web page today with a button looking like this. And so we're going to have to add sort of CSS to that button. And again, what we're going to do is we're going to define a new class in here and input it into our HTML. So in this button tag right here. So this is a little bit hard to see if you, in first time you're seeing the code. Line 15, right here where the A tag is inside of the button tag. What you're going to do is you're going to need to add a new class. And that class would be cookie button. So add a new class attribute inside of the button tag called cookie button. So once you do that, go into the style sheet and sort of add a new class, cookie button, and we'll be adding some code inside of here. Now, once we add the specific class into here, we are going to change the font size to something larger, right? It's kind of a little bit too small for me to see. So once you change the font size, it should increase that font. Now I want a bit more rounded corners. So can anybody tell me sort of what type of corner we need to make it? How do we add a rounded corner to this element right here? Feel free to unmute. I'm
Can
reading
you
that's
use
exactly.
the border radius?
Yep, that's exactly right. Just use the border radius and you're able to add a rounded corner. Great job. So let's just add a border radius of, again, just around 20 pixels. Now we're able to see sort of like a button, which with a bunch of corners that are rounded. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit of padding to the actual elements. So you can actually define paddings for certain elements. You don't have to actually define paddings for the entire set of cookies. You don't have to apply the padding for each, the left to the right, the top and the bottom, all at the same time. You can actually define individual spacings. So what I'm going to do is the left side, what I want to do is I want to add a padding of 30 pixels. The right side, I want to add a padding of 30 pixels. The top, I want to add a padding of 10 pixels. And the bottom, I want to add a padding of 10 pixels. So I'll give you a little bit of time to type that out. Some tricky text transform capitalize, it should be able to put every single letter in uppercase, but I believe that element sort of doesn't work for some browsers. So if you have that issue, don't worry. That's just something that I showed Sophia about. Yeah. So don't worry about that. Nur, is there a shorthand to do these patterns? There is a shorthand actually. But we won't really cover that because it's a little bit complicated to sort of understand for today. So if you search online, you should be able to find it. So yeah, now once we run, we're able to see add a little bit of padding around the buttons. Now, as you see here, you're able to sort of click this, but it still doesn't look too cool, right? I want to add a gradient and remove this sort of weird looking border. And how we do that is we're going to go back here and look at this, right? The linear gradient that we have here in the background, we're going to add it right down here in the cookie button to add a background of this gradient. So now once we run, we're able to see that it shows up nice and gradient. So just go ahead and copy this line right here, background, and put it down here in the cookie button. Yeah, sounds pretty. Those things might work better for you. Capitalize, what it does is it has a first letter. It capitalizes each of the first letter. And also the uppercase, what it does, it will capitalize every single letter. And lowercase, it will lowercase every single letter. Yeah, so if any of you guys need help with these steps right here, let me know. Otherwise, I will move on. So let's change the border to none. What this attribute does is basically removes the border around the sort of button right here. And then what we want to do is we want to change the color of the text. And how we do that is we add a sort of element color to it. and that will just change the text color. Sorry, of course, you can make the button, you can make it horizontal very easily. All you have to do is just change the direction of the gradient. For example, to bottom will mean it'll go from this color from the top to the bottom. Is this what you mean by horizontal? Sorry. Cool. So now when you add this border code in, border none, no border available here, color white, and you can see there's a white around this. Now the problem right here is, if I were to hover over this thing right here, it doesn't really look like a button, right? All it does is I can click it, but it doesn't really show anything when I click it as well. Miriam, it gives you a red line under that. Yeah. So are you sure that you added a semicolon or into the previous attribute? And also make sure that your spelling of the certain attribute is correct. Yep, no worries. Okay, so what we're gonna need to do is I want to sort of add some really cool animations to this. You created the gradient, but the original box is still there. Yeah. So did you make sure you add this border none sort of element here? If not, let me know which browser you use. Lena, yeah, right here. Sophia, if that doesn't work for you, what you can go ahead and do here is just add the border width and make it border width right here and make it 0. So this will just remove the border as well. So now what we can do is sort of add the hover. And this is a sort of action. So sort of when we're hovering over this specific container, we'll add some new code to it. So this sort of colon defines the action. So let's say in here, let's go ahead and add a new action, which is opacity. And in this case, opacity determines sort of the transparency of how sort of misty or sort of how clear it is. And sort of 0.6, we're gonna add sort of like opacity of this, and this will just make it a little bit more clear. So it's not just completely like just a color. It will show a little bit of white. If we just run here, let's see, as we are hovering over that specific element, you see that the opacity changes. So it's a little bit more transparent with the background. So no HTML code necessary for this line. All you need to do is just go ahead and add this and add hover action to it and add this opacity attribute. Miriam, hover basically defines code that once you hover over the specific button, you're able to see. And also, if you guys are just joining us, go ahead, just go ahead and follow along and just like look at our demo right here. later on, as we move into the JavaScript workshop, I'm going to have a sort of fresh set of code that you guys can follow as well. All right, cool. So this is nice, right? But what if I want to add a little bit more and sort of make CSS a tiny bit easier? And how we do that is sort of with a framework that we call Bootstrap. So I'm gonna go back to the slideshow right here. And sort of what I call it is the spice of CSS. So then present. It's sort of like the spice of CSS. And what that means, let's spice it up. It's basically the world's most popular framework for building responsive mobile first sites. It creates like a Bootstrap CDN as well as a template starter page. So what this does, it will contain sort of CSS and JavaScript code pre-written for you to add a certain amount of elements to your HTML. There are certain things that you're going to be able to add in Bootstrap that you've already seen, right? You're able to set sort of a bunch of sizes. You're going to set flex. You're able to set padding and margin. But in the past, what we have done, right, in the classes where we add them independently ourselves. But what if we were able to just add them in HTML and not have to go through that process of CSS to add a lot of those elements? How we do that is with Bootstrap. So there are certain things called breakpoints. These are a little bit complicated, so it's okay if you don't get it. But essentially what they are is the ability to sort of define certain code for certain devices. For example, if I have a really small device, what type of, should I change the size? Should I change the margin so that it's different for certain sizes? So sort of each of these breakpoints will determine what the margin is for that size and beyond. This is a little bit complicated, so it's totally okay. So if you can see here, what we're going to add a new class attribute. And as we did before, but in this case, we're going to tell the Bootstrap the exact type of class that we want. So in this case, we're going to have a property attribute, which determines things like your margin, your padding, things like that. And you're going to add a breakpoint element, which determines from a medium-sized screen and beyond, this is the size that we want. Then we're going to set the size. It goes from something like 1 through 6, I believe, and you're able to sort of go from small to large amounts of padding. Yeah, Sophie, that's a really, really common mistake. So don't worry about that. In fact, yeah, so you're supposed to add the class attribute to the button right here. Make sure you remember that. Otherwise, it won't work. So add the class to the button attribute instead of this A tag. Yeah. So we'll just give a quick introduction to Bootstrap and show you some of the stuff. But in order to actually use Bootstrap, it's not actually built into the HTML code right here. What you're going to need to do is you're going to add separate CSS and JavaScript files. So those things, two things you're going to need: CSS and JavaScript files into this in order to make it work. But if we were to download that code and add it to this file set, that would be kind of a little bit tedious, right? We'd have to download it and input it into every single file or website that we want to use. So instead of doing that, what we can do is go ahead and link them to external sites. We can link our CSS and JavaScript to a bit different, so outside websites. And sort of what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually add this from a certain website called Bootstrap CDN, as you saw previously. I'm going to add a new style sheet above this tile with this sort of code. What this allows me to do is link this bootstrap.min.css file to my code right here. So whatever class is in here will be defined here. And I'll go ahead and send this code as well in the chat because it's a long code. So go ahead and copy that piece of code and place it between the title and the link in the head. Also in the bottom, this is where we add our JavaScript. I'll talk to you guys a little bit more about JavaScript later on in the second half of our session, but we'll just need to add a couple more scripts. Make sure you add this above the script right here. Just above this previous script, and we're going to add these sort of elements. Now, this is a little bit complicated, right? And so please let me know if you guys need any help. So add these 3 scripts right here to the end, right after the div and right before the closing of the body and the last script tag. So these are the 3 scripts I need to add on the bottom. And for this one, just go ahead and say done if you're ready. Let me know if you guys need any help. Yeah, sure, Tom. Here's a code if you guys want to follow along, just so that you can view this while editing. If you are not, just try to do this yourselves though. And if you can't, you can follow along with this code right here. So you'll be able to access this and put it into your HTML. Miriam, you have to add it 4 times. You're going to have to add these 3 scripts. There are 3 separate scripts that will do a lot of the Bootstrap stuff. No worries. They'll have a recording at the very end. So if you have needed any help with that, and if you feel like you're a bit slow, that's totally fine. This process is really really difficult. CSS is a really difficult language. So make sure that you really are able to understand later on though, because this is going to be really helpful for when you're going to build websites for your hackathon or whatever. And if you can't follow along too well, you can just go onto my screen right here and be able to access, look at the code as I input it. Yeah. All right, so the next step here is I'm going to actually search for some code. I'm going to go onto the Bootstrap website, and I want to search for certain types of template code. Bootstrap for exam. And we'll look at the documentation for Bootstrap right here. As you can see here, it tells you to sort of add these certain CSS and JavaScript elements. We've already done that. Epic. So now let's add a few components into here. What this does is it has already predefined components that show really, really cool stuff. You might see a lot of these components in the websites that you've used in the past, right? So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to add a primary alert. And this is automatically without any HTML, without any CSS code, going to show up something really, really cool like this. And if you see right here, let's just add that to the very top. So go ahead and add this. This is the primary alert, check it out. And when you run, it will have this really nice looking blue alert. So I will copy and paste the code in the chat if you guys need this specific element. Also, let me know if this works, because it might not work if you didn't get the link and the scripts in the bottom correctly. So right here, paste it between the first div and the h1 tag. Yeah, so after you do that, we'll just add a quick message to let our node customers know that Arian has been making cookies since 1923. So now when we run this again, it's a little bit slow right now, but this should show up as that. Give me a thumbs up if this works for you. And if you need any help, feel free to raise your hand and unmute. Are you guys ready? Let me know. Yeah, Lena, make sure that you're adding this link right here in the top. I'll send it again. Add this code at the top between your style.css link and the title. And if that doesn't work, you can go ahead and just access this entire HTML file and be able to copy and paste that in. here. Need a link again. Here it is. Let me know if any of you guys are done or have any questions or need any help. Here's a link if you need any of the code again, in case it doesn't work for you. All right, so let's go ahead and add a breakpoint and add a bit of padding, not with CSS, but only on the HTML file itself. So I want a bit of padding in between right here. And sort of what we can do is we can actually just simply add, this is the simplest class you can ever see, class equals heat. And what this does is it will define the certain padding that you have for that specific class. And let's just set it at a size of 5. And we don't actually have to define the class in style CSS because it's actually already defined right here. So I think we need to get rid of this one right here. Add this back in. Yeah, so we add this right here and we run. You're able to see that there's a little bit more padding here without even adding a padding attribute. Isn't that really nice? Let me know if this works for you or you need any help. I'll give you guys sort of like 5 minutes to figure this out. Thank you, Chris. Neha, P5 in this case right here is it's able to access this Bootstrap CSS file. So Bootstrap has its own CSS file that will define this P5 class for us. Since already it has that availability and it's in that specific library in this specific link. So this class is not defined in our style.css, that's true. Instead, it's defined in this top style sheet that Bootstrap has itself. Yeah, Sophia, that's probably a great thing. So feel free to tinker with it or anything to match what you think is the best stuff. So once you're that done, we are done with the CSS portion, and we will move on to a Kahoot that we'll play and then move on to, and then give you guys a short break. So let me know if you need any help. Otherwise, we will move on to the Kahoot. Yes, Maria. All right, let's go ahead and start the Kahoot. And Neha, we're not because we're a little bit short on time today. But if you want to add that, it's super simple. All you need to do is add this span right here, and you can see it as I input, so you'll be able to view it. And what this does is it will be able to add that new attribute up top. Or even if you want to do it somewhere else, you might want to do it in the cookie jar here. Add this sort of element right here, which is like a badge element. And this will add a badge like the new text right at the bottom. Bunch of news. All right, so let's get started with the Kahoot. Yeah, so when you're ready, just go ahead and go to kahoot.it and enter this game. We have 19 players, so if you want to get in, there's like around 10 to 20 people still around. So join the Kahoot. We'll give you guys 2 more minutes. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Oh, one person. Oh, wait. Are we ready? Let's go. Yeah, so the link tag actually links to spreadsheets. So as you see right here, it doesn't really link to other pages because it links to this .css. So if you want to link to other pages, how you do that is with the href inside of the a tag. But yeah, this is a hard one. Very nice job. Yeah, so class and style both work to actually help you to add CSS. Yeah, so it will add the space. If you remember, I told you, remember from this for the quiz, it adds the space between the element and its parent. Very nice. 20 people got it right. Yeah. So we've done this in the code previously. Yeah, so you might have gotten confused if you selected the triangle with align text, align items, which aligns it vertically. That's very different from text align. So whenever you're doing aligning text, you have to use a text align attribute. This is a hard one. Oh, everybody got it. I mean, 24 people got it, but great job. And also, if you selected this one actually allows you to define it as styles for certain HTML tags. So this also allows you to sort of add like CSS, but maybe in a slightly different way, not exactly a class. So it's really important that you include that dot in order to define that class. Yeah, so this might be a little bit confusing, right? That HTML and CSS, the files that you need inside of the HTML is actually CS and JavaScript. As you see, we added the CSS on top and the JavaScript on the bottom. You might be thinking, oh, yeah, I might have worded this question a little bit bad because you kind of need to use HTML to actually use Bootstrap. Lena, so yeah, that's a great question. So Bootstrap is actually sort of like a framework for HTML and CSS that allows you to add CSS code onto the site without actually adding CSS. So it's just a really, really cool framework that you use so that you don't have to write a lot of your CSS code. So you can just input a bunch of different classes in there and have it work. Yeah, so large actually sets the breakpoint. And the M, this stands for margin, it sets the property. Very nice. Yeah, so the 4 in here sets the size and the Bootstrap. Nine out of 10, very nice. The Uni team, very well done. And Rotella, Verita, and Fifina. All the All right, so we're gonna have a break right now. We're gonna be back at 9:45. I mean, whatever time you're at. So like 45 right now. So in around 8 minutes, at 45, we'll be back to have a JavaScript workshop. So this is gonna be really cool. Just to give you a quick preview, we're gonna be creating a counter will also generate random types of code. Random types of code. Thank you, everyone. So we'll take a quick break. Right, everybody. Go ahead and on back. We will start the JavaScript workshop now. So for JavaScript, it's very different from CSS and HTML in that the past few that we've been showing are more, I would say they're not really programming languages. They don't have sort of the normal things that we consider, like things about like variables and if statements, so things like that. And if you don't have any of those, that's totally, and experiencing any of those, totally fine. I'll give you guys a quick introduction in the next few slides. But JavaScript is sort of like a programming language that allows you to create events and make your web page interactive. It's a programming language that allows you to interact with your web page in some very, very cool ways. And as you see, we're going to be creating a cookie counter and sort of a list of sort of different cookies to put on our web page. So JavaScript variables are sort of containers that store data values. There are three types of ways you can define a container, either with variable, let, like you might have seen in some of your let x or whatever in your math classes, or constant right here. Let me go back. And what a constant means is once you define it, you can't really change it afterwards, but it still is a great way to store a certain data value. So what you can do is you can use that value and reference it later. And we're going to be using a lot of constants in our next few projects. Now, there are certain sort of data types in variables. There are sort of strings, integers, and with decimals, as well as objects that have multiple properties. They might have properties like adding a couple strings, some that have a couple integers or a couple objects or whatever in it itself. But these are sort of like the most common data types that we see in variables. So strings are sort of like they string a bunch of letters together, either create words or a bunch of sentences or paragraphs or whatever. And sort of arrays in JavaScript are sort of like lists. So you declare an array with constant array equals in square brackets, and then a semicolon. And what you can do is you'll be able to sort of look at elements of that list. For example, you can push a list, you can put another element in here, you can pop an element from it, take away an element from it, what that means, and also find elements. For example, I want to find where is high located, where is sub located. And we'll be able to interact with a couple of these in the future. There are also things like JavaScript functions. You can declare functions with this and a function this, and then parentheses and square brackets. And these are sort of blocks of code that you can use to perform a certain task. So you can pass in parameters and you can return something, but we won't go over that too much in this specific workshop. But it also does something when it gets called on. So when we call do something, it will do the code in the function. If statements are things that basically, if this is true, then we'll do something. And this is something called a Boolean, true or false, just true or false value. So if true, then do the following that is available in the bracket. And we're also going to be experimenting with for loops, so you can run code multiple times, but we'll go over that later. Do you guys have any questions for these few things, these normal language stuff. It can be very difficult to understand. We're going to be going more in detail with each of these in the future with our project. But feel free to unmute. All right, cool. So let's go ahead and show you guys a new starter code. So if you guys want to just look at this link right here. Look at this link right here and go ahead and click that. It should have a sort of code already available for you. Also, if you already have your code from last time and you have it working correctly, then you don't need to do this. We'll just go off of your code from your CSS workshop as well. So if you have your code ready, don't worry about working this. But if you weren't able to succeed in that, go ahead and go to this link. And you should be able to find like a fork button like last time and go into and get the repository and access it yourself. Let me know if you got that to work. Say down in the chat if you could. All right, cool. So if you run this code, you should be able to see that it has this cool looking thing that we were somewhat creative. We couldn't finish most of it, but we were able to get most of the stuff. So you should be able to see the screen right here. And what we want to do is we want to create a counter somewhere right here. So our first task is we need to create a sort of a text that shows up that will determine sort of the value of how many cookies you have. So let's just go right here. Before this A tag, let's add a quick H1 tag, and we'll add 0 here. And it'll show up as sort of 0 cookies that we have so far. So right here in between the A tag and your P tag that shows up with the paragraph, add this H1 right here. So now when you add the H1, it shows up as 0 here. And now how we reference things in sort of JavaScript is we use something different. And what we use in this case, we use an ID attribute. So with an ID attribute, we're able to reference that inside of our script.js right here. So in this case, let's go ahead and set our attribute right here into ID number. Now what this does is it makes it so that once we we can get the ID inside of our JavaScript and we can do code that will relate to that element. You see in the bottom right here, we have a sort of script.js, and that is what allows us to link our script to the script.js that we will do later on. So in CSS, what we did was we used the link tag, but in JavaScript, what we need to do is add the script tag in order to link the JavaScript file. So once you're able to have this H1 available with the ID, just go ahead and we're going to be able to try to figure out if we can find a way to reference that ID. And how we do that is we're going to create a new variable. We're going to, as you saw in the first slide, we can use that with constant number, and how we are able to get the specific element is due to a very specific function. And that's document.getElement. You can see it already tries to help me out with this. Get element by ID number. So now what this does is it should get me the element for this H1 tag because it has the ID number. So now how are we able to get the sort of text content out? How do we get this actual zero value? And what that is actually using the parameter inside of number, which is an element, text content. So every time you want to figure out sort of the specific text inside of here, you just have to do number.text content. And you can see it's already a property that is defined for us. And if we run, we're able to, this is like a print statement. It's able to help you see things in the console. So if you log to the console, you can see that in the console right in the bottom, very small, but it logs the text content at 0, which is available here. Now, if we were to change the text content to something like 5, you can see that in the console here, it sees that the text content is 5. But let's just keep it at 0 for now. So let me know, does anybody have any questions about this step? Here's the code if you haven't gotten it already. Yep, Tylen and Marutha is, yes, exactly. It's like a variable. It allows us to store sort of data values. And in this case, we can store an object. We can store an object, which is the element. Here is the link in case somebody goes on. So what we need to do here is whenever we click here to get a cookie, what we need to do is we need to increment this value. Basically say every time we click get a cookie, increase this value to 1, then 2, then 3, and whatever. So what we need to do is first we need to get the element. First, reference the element inside our script.js here. And so we have to go back to here. And first of all, we need to remove this a tag because it's not very helpful for us. In this case, because we're not going to be able to actually link, we're not linking this actual button to any other web page. So we don't need the a tag in this circumstance. All we need is that button tag right here. And that will help us sort of get us to the specific ID here. So in this case, we'll just add another ID. And in this case, we'll call that ID button. So what this does means we can reference it again back in our JavaScript with get element by ID. So add the ID, remove the A tags, and add the ID button right here. All right. So let's just go into the script here. Constant button is equal get element by ID. In this case, we will get the element ID button. And so now we are able to reference that button element in this constant right here. Now, if we're able to console log that now, print that to the console, you're able to see that it will show up as something like a button element. So just go ahead and add this code into your JavaScript. Now you can see HTML button element is printed whenever we have the console.log. So let me know if you're done with this. Yes, Sophia. No problem. So let me know once you're done. Yeah, so the console.log line, I mean, you see in the console on the bottom right here, what the console.log thing is, it will show up in the console here, so we know the value of this variable. So it will print like a printer does into the console tab right here that will show up what the specific thing is. For example, we were able to find the value of this property text content and find that it is 0, just like we're able to see here. So it's just a way for us to verify what we think this specific thing is. Gauri, are you sure that you didn't add a, are you sure that you copied this line constant button exactly correctly? And you make sure you don't add like a dot button or whatever. Just make sure it's just only button. No worries. Let me know if there's anything else, and if you're done once again. If you already not said it before. Cool. So now what we want to do is we want to add an event listener. What this does is every time we want to click the button, we want to do a certain action. And how we do that is we're going to add a function button.add event listener. And so this adds listener, once a click action is defined on the specific button element, then we will do something called increment the count. So this listens for a click and will do this function. And this button will reference this element right here. So if you're done with this, let me know why this wouldn't work. For example, if I were to run this right now, you can see that I'm getting an error, something like this. That's a good guess, Miriam. Actually, we're still using the same button element in this circumstance. So your actual, yeah, exactly. So Miriam, again, yeah. So your button is already defined. So you don't need to actually do anything else in HTML right here. And Sophia, Neha, you guys are exactly right. We don't even know. How do we know what increment count is if we didn't really define what that is, right? The code won't be able to automatically know what it is for us. So you have to be able to understand that the code will need for you to write something. So in this case, what we need to do is we need to create a function and call increment count. So all we need to do here is just create the function increment count, have the parentheses, and then create a sort of curly braces. And now we're able to add a few things inside of our increment count. So now what we do, very simple. We take our text content and we do plus plus. What this tells the code is to say, whatever value it is before, every time you call this function, it will add 1 to that value. So increment count will take the text content, which is currently 0, and add 1 every time you call it. So take it from 0 plus 1 to 1, plus 1 to 2, plus 1 to 3. So if you look at the code in general, what it does is it listens. It listens for a click. And every time that click is available, what it does, it will call this function increment count and add 1 to the text content. So now that our increment count is properly defined, what we can do is once we run, we're able to actually interact with the web page. So now every time we click the button, we're able to get a cookie and see it increment in our page. It's pretty cool. Yeah, Suchi, great question. The plus plus allows you to add 1 to that text content. So for example, every time it's 0, it will add 1 from 0 to 1, from 1 to 2. So add 1, so this is plus plus, plus plus, plus plus, every time we'll add 1. All right. So now, what if Aryan isn't really happy that all of you guys are getting over 10 cookies? What if you want to say if the text content is more than 10, what we want to do is instead of changing it into another 11, I don't want to be able to take away 30 cookies from Aryan, who's an amazing chef. What I want to do is I want to send a message that says, aren't you full yet? So change the actual text content into that whenever a certain value is, it goes into like over 10 cookies. So in this place, what we need here, what do you guys think we need here to accomplish that? We need to say if there's more than 10 cookies, then we will change the text content. Amazing. Miriam, not really another function in this circumstance. You can do another function, but in this case, where we can actually just do it in increment count, since every time we click, we will be able to see the amount of cookies. So exactly, the main thing you do in this case is you add an if statement. So in this case, what we can do is we can set an if statement. So if the number.text content, which we now know is the number of cookies, is more than 10, and we use the sort of more than operator as you see in school, and parentheses around this. So this says if the number.text content is more than 10, then we will run the code inside of these curly braces. In this case, we'll set the number.text content to not be a number, but actually be something called just a message to our users. Aren't you full yet? So every time it's more than 10, we'll just say, aren't you full? So now if we go ahead and run it, we'll be able to see that every time we click get a cookie, and once it gets to 0 from 10, as you see right now, it'll just say, aren't you full yet? And sort of that's what an if statement accomplishes here. Yes, Sophia, for loops wouldn't work in this circumstance. And the reason why is because you have to look for a click element in order to increment the count. We will use for loops later on, but we have to look for click and increment it one time. So there's no really loop that we can use to get to do it multiple times. So you don't really use a for loop in this circumstance. And we'll show you an example later on where you might use a for loop. Miriam, go ahead.
Well, in the if statement, we are actually first reading that number.text content is greater than 10, and then we are replacing it with aren't you full yet, right? So shouldn't the string or the text aren't you full yet be written in the click here to get a cookie instead of above it?
Yeah. So that would work too, right? So what this would do, you're exactly right, actually, that if the number.text content, this is adding it one already, right? So that means if this was 10, it would change it to 11. So in this case, you would want to move it up. Exactly right. That if the text content is more than 10 from the very start, then you're able to see it. So if it's 11 on the screen here, you click another get another cookie, you're able to change it to aren't you full yet. So either one of these would work. This would make a lot of more sense exactly for your code ability, readability. So if you're done, that's amazing. Now you have the sort of cookie counter sort of set. And I'll give you guys a few minutes to sort of catch on this if you haven't already. And then we will move on to actually creating sort of random cookie type generators. And sort of every time we click get a cookie, we'll be able to see a random cookie pop up of a different type, like white chocolate or oatmeal raisin. Sophia, so if you were to now, the problem with this code right now is if you were to actually go above, if you were to go above 11 and you click again, for example, it will go to NaN. That means if you keep on clicking too quickly, what it does is it will increment count and will look for, it will actually increment this. But the problem is you're incrementing the string right here, which is, you can't really increment that, right? There's not really ability for you to add one to this text content, right? So it wouldn't really work. So what you need to do, what happens is it will just stay at NaN. So you just need to make sure you don't go over 11. Oh, huh. Yeah, there's a problem maybe with the start in the front then. Yeah, so I think you do need to actually put this if statement in the back, because if you were to set this number.text content and increment it again, it wouldn't work because you're adding one to this text content. Yes, Sophia, feel free to try that one out and see if that works for you. I think there's a lot of different ways of doing it. So if you're able to get that one to work, that's really amazing. All right, so let's go ahead. And what we're going to do is we're going to reset this and we are going to create a new element. And we're going to see that new element in here. And we're going to create a sort of like cookie list. And how we do that is we're going to go ahead and go into here. And we will have a div right here. We'll add a new div right after the number. So right here, I'm going to add a new div class. We're going to set that ID to cookie list. And we'll just have nothing in that container. We're going to be adding a bunch of elements to that container soon. Yeah, so go ahead and add this div right here. Right, so once you added that div, you can now reference it again, like we did in the past, with our constant cookie list is equal to documents dot get element by ID cookie list. Now, if we console.log that, it should show it as an HTML element. Yep. So just go ahead and add this code inside. Yep, so you can see that now it shows up in the console, right in the bottom right here with HTML div element. Yes, read the console log is the ability for you to actually print this list into the console in the bottom right here. It's basically a way for you to see the value of a certain item. So now what we need to do is, yeah, So now what we need to do is look at this list right here. How do you comment things out? Neha, you can just go ahead and look at this. So hover over, put your cursor and click on this line. And what you can do is, if you're using a Mac, Command/, using a Windows, do Control/. And you'll be able to comment things out and have that code not registered. Maryam, what is the cookie list? So the cookie list is something we're going to be implementing where every time we click to get a cookie, we'll be able to see a random type cookie type pop up here. So now what we do is we're going to define a list of cookies inside our script. Now, how do we define a list? What data type do we need to define a list? Go ahead and unmute or say it in the chat. Yeah, Shafian, we're able to, we have this session recorded and we post it. Neha, exactly right. It is an array. Yeah, so we're gonna have to define an array in this specific instance. What we'll do here is we'll do constant list is equal to, and we're gonna define sort of the list as a couple different types of cookies. So chocolate chip, macadamia nut, oatmeal raisin, white chocolate, and raspberry, and double fudge. Now, this has no relation to the code that we have with our cookie list element. So later on, what we'll do is we're going to be able to connect these two. So now what we can do is we can go ahead and we may want to change the element later on, list later on. So we can actually just append a certain element. And how we do that is with this list right here. So we just have to do with the push method and add the word element in here. And sort of this will append to this list right here at the very end, element. Why different types of brackets? Yeah, so the square brackets is what tells the code that we're defining an actual array, a list. The parentheses tells us we're adding a parameter to a certain function. So console.log, it would add a parameter. Push will add this parameter. And this curly brackets is what tells us we're defining a set of code, set of instructions that we want to run inside of this if statement or function or whatever. Yes, Sophia, that one works perfectly. Yeah, that should work. But yeah, list.push allows you to add another element inside of your list. So yeah, push means append. It appends something to the list. You add a new element to the list. But now if we realize something, none of these actually say cookie in here. But I'm too lazy right now to actually change this to add a cookie into every single element of the list. So is there a way I can do this, right? In fact, I can actually change each element of the list. And how we do that is we are able to reference its index. And what the index is, for example, the chocolate chip, for each element, there will be index that we can use to reference. And chocolate chip, in this case, will be the 0 index. Macadamia will be first index. Oatmeal will be the second index. White chocolate chip and raspberry will be third index. And finally, double fudge will be the fourth index. So these, you don't have to write out. These are just comments that I put in here to show you what the index is. So this will be, so it will start from 0 and increment 1 each one onwards. Now, what I could do is I can just go in here, list 0 equal list 0, which is a current, and then we will add this to the string. What this will do, it will change it into from chocolate chip into chocolate chip cookie. All right, so it will change this chocolate chip into chocolate chip cookie. Now I could, I could do this like, I could do this like 5 times for each cookie, right? And it would still work. And I would add this reference in 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's kind of tedious, right? And if we have sort of 1,000, a million different types of elements in our list, and we're having to do this code like 1,000,000 times, we'd be here for another 5 years in the Zoom call. So it would have been it would be very unfortunate. So instead, the best way to do that is actually to use a for loop. So for loop is a bit complicated in this circumstance. What we do is we will use a for loop to add 1 to an index until it gets to a certain number. So there are sort of 3 elements that you need to define inside of your first for loop, in your for loop parentheses right here. What you need to do is define a variable. This will be our index variable that we will loop through. Then what we'll do is we're going to add a list.length. So if the certain index, this variable, is less than the length of this list, which is 5 right now, then we will continue running this loop. And every time we run through a block of the loop, what we're going to do is we're going to increment this variable. So think about it. When it's 0, we'll run through it again. We'll increment 1 at the end, and then we'll check, is I less than 5? It's only 1 right now, so we continue running the loop. We continue running the loop until it gets to 5. And when it gets to 5, we'll see that it's not less than 5 actually. It's actually equal to 5. So in this case, the loop will stop. So, and then in every single instance of this loop, we will take that index value and we will change that in here. So we will change that. We'll look at list I, which is list I plus space cookie. So now what that does is it allows us to look at each of these each of these cookies in the list and be able to add the space cookie in each element. This is a bit complicated, so if you're not really familiar with sort of coding in the past, this may seem a bit complicated to you, in which case don't worry too much about it. Just make sure you get this code onto your own So now if we console.log, we print out the list. We should be able to see that each one of them contain the cookie. Yeah, if you see print here, you're able to see that the element contains cookie in every single element now. Bottom here in the console. All right, let's go ahead and move on to our next function right here. What we need to do is every time we click this button right here, we want an element to show up. We want to add an element to the screen that will contain a random cookie. And how we do that is we're going to actually add another event listener to button right here. So every time it clicks, we're going to add the function add a random cookie to the list we see over here. So every time we click here to get a cookie, a list will show up. So this is a little bit complicated, but we will now have to define the function add a random to list. And in this case, what we'll need to do is we're going to need to define a random index. We know that the index of these go from 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we need to reference a value of the list randomly. So how we do that is we're going to actually define a constant called random index. And in this place, what we're going to do is we're going to take math.random. This helps us get a number between 0 and 1. Then we multiply that by 5 in order to show the length of the list we see in here. So since the length of the list is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, in this case, we'll need to reference it and multiply that by 6. And so that it will give us a random number between 1 and 0 and 6. Actually, probably the best way to do this in this case would be actually to multiply it by. Probably multiply by 5 actually. So that when we're doing this, we're able to get an index from 0 to 5. Because after we push element in here, it gets us the 5th item, 5th index as well, since we push the element into the list. So for random.index, we'll just round that into an integer for our index. So this is a bit complicated, but then once we console.log, you see that we're able to get a random number from 0 to 5 every single time. Yeah, so every time we click this, you can see we get a number 4. Click it again, 5, 4, 4, 3, 3, 0, 4, 3, 3. So just a bunch of random numbers every single time in the console down here. So you don't get this part is also really okay. It's a bit complicated. So let me know if you added the code so far. If you guys need any help, feel free to speak up. All right. So now what we need to do is we need to actually add the value of the list inside of our code right here. So in this case, we're going to create a new cookie element. And to create an element, we just have to do constant cookie. It's equal to document.create element h2. This basically is equivalent of adding an h2 tag. How that I don't think it's supposed to change color every time you press it or something. But we will append sort of text. And how we do that is sort of with an h2 tag. It will add an h2 tag just like you see in the HTML right here, and be able to see those pop up in our div in this cookie list container. We'll add a bunch of h2 tags. So now what we do is we're going to go document.create element h2. And then what we'll do is we will we will create a text node, which will create basically the inner text of this h2 tag, like you saw in the HTML file. Just create a text node. In this case, we'll reference the random index of this list. So we just do like we did before with the I, square brackets. That's how we reference this as an index. And we reference random index. So what this does, it will create the text inside of this cookie. And with that text, it will be the list random index. So it'll be a random thing from 0 to 5, which will determine which one of the lists will include. So chocolate chip cookie, or is it old raisin cookie, or is it double fudge, whatever. So now we need to do something called binding, right? Appending, as we call it. We will have to actually add this actual element that we created here into the list element. So we will append this cookie node right here. And what this does is it will create the text inside of this cookie element, this h2 tag. Then in our cookie list that we defined at the very start here, right here, we're going to append this cookie. What this does is, again, creates an element, creates a text underneath the element in cookie node, appends that text to the cookie element, and then finally it will append that cookie into the cookie list. So now when we run this, it should add a text element to each one every single time we add one. Yeah, so every time we add one, you'll see we're getting an almond cookie, then we're getting a macadamia nut cookie, then we're getting oat raisin, double fudge, chocolate chip, all different types of cookies. Feel free to unmute and speak up if you have any questions. But this is basically the main functionality. We're able to add a cookie to the list every time we click here. There's a lot of code that may not seem very clear, so feel free to ask about individual sections and everything and to figure out if you need any help. Yeah. So this element right here, it creates an element. So it creates like a tag that you saw in your HTML. Creates an H2, headline 2 tag. So in this case, the cookie node, it creates a text underneath that tag. And what that does is of a list random index. So we'll take the random index that we found, something between 0 and 5. It will take the element from this list, for example, chocolate cookie. And then it will, someone deleted the code Not sure, but I will add that back in. Okay, great, whoever to get back in, but yeah, so list random index will determine, it's like something in this list. For example, white chocolate and raspberry, we'll create a text with that. Finally, we'll append that text to the actual cookie element. Then finally, we'll append that cookie element to the list of cookies, which we define here as the container. Append means we'll add a specific property to that. So in this case, this should be append child, but we're able to append the text, basically add that text to that h2 tag, and add that cookie h2 tag to our div tag that we've defined at the very start. So essentially what this is doing, you can think of it, first element in here is it creates the h2 tag. That's the first line of code. Second line of code adds the text, for example, oatmeal raisin cookie. And the third tag binds this text to this h2 tag. And the fourth line of code binds this h2 tag to the div. If you're done, feel free to customize the colors and customize certain messages. For example, add your name here as well. And yeah, so just create your own cookie jar, how you like it. Right, so if you're done with your customizations, you can go ahead, send the website you see here in the chat, and yeah, send your website into the chat, and we can put your awesome creations. Samskriti, yeah, these are really, really difficult lines. So what it does is this adds text to the h2 tag. So what it does right now is, I'll show you right here. So the third and fourth lines. So the first two lines, what it does, it will create like an h2 tag outside of here. So it's like completely outside, like not really relevant to anything, right? So for example, we'll add something like white chocolate cookie. Like white chocolate cookie. The third line, the last two lines, will take this text, insert it inside of the h2 tag. The fourth line will take this h2 tag and insert it inside of the div. So again, the white chocolate cookie text will be inserted inside of the H2 tag, and then the H2 tag will be inserted inside of this div right here. Yeah, so you can access the code right here. This is a new code. And also feel free to unmute if you guys have any questions or raise your hand. That's great. Yeah, also when you're ready, just go ahead, send your websites in the chat so we can take a look. Sophia, what you want to do is you want to take this right here. There should be like a sort of repl.co right here. Website, and just send that one in the chat. There you go. Where do you get the color codes? Actually, if you want to change new color codes, there's a really, really amazing website that I use. It's called uigradients.com. Hold on, it's a bit slow, but you're able to see a bunch of really, really cool gradients in here. For example, you'll be able to copy these a lot of color codes and put them into your code. So I'll send the website and you can create your own sort of color. So I recommend all of you guys create some really cool colors. Neha, yeah. So there's some really nice gradients if you want to use them in here as well. Great. So if you're done, go ahead and set your websites in the chat. Well, amazing job, Sophie. You also added a very nice bullet point, which I really like. Nice job, Samruti. You also like and added your name. Amazing. Neha, love the cool grading you added. Amazing job. You also added your own sort of like top to bottom as well, which is really, really cool. Amazing work. Maruthala, I would say you make sure you get the code from like right here, this code in the website section. So take this and copy it. All right. Amazing, amazing work. Love your name customizations. Tamia, amazing work. Right, so we're about at the end of this workshop. It's already 11:02. We're just going to go over a few quick ones. Escobar, Gabrielle, love it. I like how you added the button to the entire thing. Oh, I guess you're trying to fix this button issue, I guess. Might have forgotten to add a button, the ending button tag. So a slash button or something. I'm glad that you enjoyed it, Garrett. Serena, if you want to make sure that you are sending this website to the right, that will be helpful. Although I can take a look at this if you want to. I appreciate it, Sophie. Tomer, amazing work. I love the green text over the button and your amazing gradient. All right, Mamta, great work. Yeah, so Magna, if you want to get ready to give a closing statement or anything, that'd be great. But it was great seeing all of you guys' projects. Amazing work. You guys all did really well. You guys want, there's going to be a recording later on to help you guys. If you guys do need any support later on. I know this is really, really difficult for a lot of the aspects. So yeah. Thank you guys.
Absolutely. Sorry, you okay, yeah. I was looking through you guys' project. They all look super, super great. I'm so glad you guys were able to learn something today. Yeah, so that concludes our like weekend workshops for this weekend. Next week is the actual hackathon for those of you who are in the Discord. A couple teams are like, if your guys' name is on the sheet, then you guys are going to be participating in the hackathon next week. If you guys have any questions, Tevin is available to answer, as he said, and the recording will be available to you guys. We'll send you guys an email later with the link to the recording as well. Any last minute questions before we conclude? Someone asked if you can send the slides as well.
Yeah, I'll send them into the.
Okay.